How's it going, guys? Landon with LMR.com. Good old Project Green Bean has now reached stage 4 of the build. This covered our manual rack, manual brakes, and the spool in the rear end. There really wasn't a lot of parts getting thrown around in this particular stage, but the components we did address took a while to get installed. However, like the majority of the parts we already put on, all of this went together just as easy. All right, enough of me talking. Let's get to the good stuff. First and foremost, if you guys somehow have missed the intro, stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, be sure to get those videos under your belt, which can be viewed by clicking the links in the video description. Oh boy, stage 4, not a lot happened, but a lot did happen, if you know what I mean. Backtracking to stage 1 and the removal of the power steering pump and power rack. We opted to do all of that in stage 1 because of the removal of the K-member. Getting all the power assist stuff out of the way is pretty easy. To be totally honest with you guys, we removed all of it together and dropped it out of the bottom of the car. First, the master cylinder and lines to the proportioning valve were removed, followed by the power steering pump from the front of the engine. Next came the power steering cooler lines from the front of the radiator. These were simply cut and plugged to prevent any fluid from coming out and making a mess. We then took the reservoir loose and removed the brake booster from the firewall. You will need to disconnect some of the electrical connections to pass the Hydro Boost out of the bottom of the car. Keep in mind, this can be messy, so be expecting a little fluid to leak out. Just be mindful and wipe it up fairly quickly. On the way down, remove the power steering rack from the K-member since the power brakes utilize the same system as the power rack. Both must be converted to manual setups. The full power assist setup weighed in at roughly 50 pounds. Once we reach the end of the build, we'll give you guys a better understanding of the weight savings. With all that out of the way, now you can set the Flaming River rack onto the Team Z K-member. We did source our own hardware to secure the rack to the K-member. When making this conversion, you will need a bump steer kit, so we went with the Team Z offering, which fit absolutely perfect. Since this is a manual rack, you will have to have a manual rack specific bump steer kit, so keep that in mind. In order to get the bump steer kit to fit properly, we did have to trim the brake dust shields to clear the heim joints or the rod ends. The Flaming River steering shaft was then prepped for install. This hefty unit deletes the factory rag joint and helps achieve better steering response. This particular unit must be fitted to the car. Basically, make sure to dimple the shaft where all the set screws will mesh. Apply some red Loctite to all the set screws except for the bolt securing the steering shaft to the pinion shaft on the rack. You'll want to use blue Loctite for whenever you get to it. Of course, before working on the steering shaft, make sure the bolt is accessible and you lock the clock spring by turning the wheel with the key in the off position. If you don't do this, you could potentially damage the clock spring. Now it's time to remove the brake pedal assembly. I would advise removing the driver's side seat to make this assembly just a tad easier. There is one bolt that is facing up that retains the pedal assembly. Once that is loose, disconnect the brake switch and clutch switch if equipped. This being an automatic car, obviously ours didn't have a clutch switch. With the pedal assembly on a workbench, carefully remove the cross bolt and return spring. We then utilize the template provided by Maximum Motorsports to drill a new hole for relocating the return spring. When disassembling the pedal assembly, we did have to use the provided brake switch from Maximum Motorsports. Going this route will call for custom fabrication if someone wants to retain their cruise control. To us, it's overrated, so we got rid of it. Once all that was buttoned up, we reinstalled the pedal assembly back into the car. When doing this, we had to use the included hardware to secure it to the master cylinder adapter plate. This allowed us to use a 1994 to 1995 Cobra master cylinder. A 94-95 Cobra master cylinder is required for all 1996 to 2004 Mustangs running this particular manual brake setup. To connect the master cylinder to the proportioning valve, we reached out to Maximum Motorsports again for the needed brake lines. The connection sizes are identical, just flip-flopped for each line. One line will have a 10mm connection on the master cylinder to a 12mm on the proportioning valve and vice versa. Both of these lines came straight, so we did have to make gradual bends to get them connected. We then installed the included master cylinder push rod and adjusted the length to where it barely touched the piston and the master cylinder. That wasn't the last of the adjustments. That was followed up with adjusting the pedal arm to barely depress the brake switch. Not doing this right will result in your brake lights not properly working. .3 fluid was used to bleed the entire system. One last fitment note for you guys on this particular step: if you have a Romeo based engine, you will need a power steering pump delete bracket and pulley. Now that the front components were buttoned up, we moved back to the rear end to install the Strange Engineering C-clip eliminators and spool. Like the manual setup in the front, this does take above average mechanical ability to complete. We started this off by removing the brake hardware. We then opened the diff cover, drained the fluid, removed the C-clips, of course removed the axles, pulled the carrier, and then cleaned the housing with brake clean. The axle bearings and seals were drove out, removal of the anti-squeal braces were next, and then the biggest hair-raising event of the whole ordeal happened. We cut the ends of the axle tubes off per the instructions provided by Strange. With the carrier on the table, we removed the ring gear and then pressed the new bearings onto the spool. The ring gear was then installed onto the spool, and the spool was installed into the axle housing. Backlash was then set, followed by the install of the included axles and C-clip eliminators. We then reinstalled the diff cover and filled her up with fluid. Wow, fellas, hopefully I didn't confuse or bore anyone to death with all that jibber jabber. In a nutshell, guys, that completes stage 4. I'm sure by now we've probably already ruffled a few feathers by doing what we've done to a somewhat perfect new edge. But hey, we cater to the masses here at LMR.com. To keep tabs on good old Green Bean here, guys, be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already done so. And until next time, when we tackle stage 5 of the build, keep it right here with the real Mustang enthusiasts, LMR.com.